and a voice kept whispering my name. I am unerased, unerased, no longer hiding behind yesterday. Unerased, you can break my heart, but not my soul. Unerased, you can shake my world, but not take control. I found a woman I was always meant to be. She was waiting underneath the pieces left of me.
Well, hello. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to UnErased with Trish Lacy. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone again who watched last week's episode, who shared and who commented and reached out after episode 2. I know it was a lot going on in episode 2, and I appreciate everyone's curiosity, and thank you for showing up again this week. So many of you understood exactly what I meant when I was talking about losing trust in yourself. And although you may not have called a grocery store about some eggs, you understood my confusion. And that means the world to me. You understood what it feels like to know something is wrong while someone repeatedly tells you that the problem is you. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. This is a space where we tell the truth about our emotional and narcissistic abuse, reclaim parts of ourselves that we've lost, and remind one another that healing is possible. So I'm going to do like they do in the episodes of like last week on the episode of the Housewives. I'm going to recap for you. Last week, I told you about the receipt. I saw the words general merchandise 12 count, and I convinced myself that my husband was buying condoms. I did call the grocery store. I read the employee SKU number, and I waited for confirmation. And she told me they were a dozen eggs. I went to bed embarrassed and wondered whether I had become exactly what my husband said I was: super suspicious, insecure, and emotional, and always looking for something. And then that following afternoon, I was upstairs using his iPad, and I wasn't checking his messages. I was just going through searching and surfing when his phone synced with it, and I started getting notifications. One came through from a coworker saying, "Hey, stop cheating with Natalie. You have a family. You're better than this." And then there was a voice recording from Natalie. I pressed play, and I heard her laugh. And then I heard her call my husband Poppy. And just for clarification, because I feel like I just did this, it's hilarious. Natalie was Black woman. She was not Hispanic. She is Black lady, but she was calling him Poppy. So the day before, I had gone looking for proof and found eggs. The next day, I wasn't looking for anything at all, and the truth found me. I walked downstairs holding the iPad. My husband looked up from his phone. I looked him directly in the eyes and I asked, "Are you cheating on me?" Tonight, I get to tell you how he answered, and I'm going to tell you about the number saved under a fake name. And I'm also going to tell you what happened when his confession, I'm going to tell you, when his confession somehow became his crisis, and I was expected to comfort him. But we're also going to talk about a very real thing called malignant narcissism, what it is, what it is not, and why confronting someone with evidence does not always produce accountability. Sometimes it produces rage, sometimes it produces blame, and sometimes it produces a performance designed to pull you right back on into the role you are finally beginning to escape. So when I'm going to go back to the confrontation. So when I asked him, "Are you cheating on me?" his reaction was immediate. He exploded. He yelled. He accused me of creating drama, fabricating stories, looking for something that wasn't there. Think about that. I am standing there holding an iPad containing the messages, one in particular that says, "Stop cheating with Natalie." And then I heard this woman call him Poppy. But somehow I'm still the one being accused. That is one of the most disorienting patterns in emotionally abusive relationships. You enter the conversation with the evidence of their behavior, and sometimes you leave that conversation defending your character. So suddenly that conversation was not about the messages. It was about, why did you have the iPad? It isn't about the affair. It's not about my suspicions. It wasn't about the deception. It was about my reaction to discovering it. But that day, something in me refused to accept another explanation. For the first time, I didn't back down. I looked at him and said, well, let's call the number if you're not cheating. So I picked up my phone, well, his phone actually, and dialed the number that was listed on the iPad, and so I typed the number to the phone. And when the caller ID appeared on the screen, it did not say Natalie. It said John Adams. It didn't say Poppy. It said John Adams, a fake name. Her name had been deliberately hidden under a man's name. So this was not a misunderstanding. This was not anxiety. This was not my imagination creating a story. This was deception with a system. So I pressed call. The phone rang once, and then it rang again, rang twice. And then that was when everything changed. He took the phone from my hand. His shoulders dropped. His chest started heaving. And the outrage that he had just magically disappeared. And then the tears came. And he looked at me and said, I'm cheating on you with Natalie. There it was. The confession I thought I needed. The proof I believed would finally make everything clear. But clarity doesn't always bring you relief. Sometimes it just brings devastation. And when the truth changes everything, like in my brain, I really expected to see the scene from Waiting to Exhale, right? I expected to burn his clothes, tear up his car, but I had zero reaction like that. And that was so surprising to me. I was just kind of in shock. Like he really did admit, because, sometimes narcissists never admit when they're wrong. So he admitted he cheated. I'm looking around and the house looked the same. The refrigerator continued making the noise that it makes. It hums. Our furniture didn't move or anything. The lights were still coming through the windows. But the life that I thought I was living was over. It had ended. I remember standing there holding that iPad like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My breathing came, it was very shallow, and my ears were ringing. I could literally taste the metal in my mouth from the adrenaline. I'm like, I can remember this day like it was yesterday. So for so long, the betrayal had lived in the shadows. It existed in late nights, suspicious explanations, missing time, hitting phone calls, and feelings that I could never prove. And now it was standing right there directly in front of me, undeniable, like unavoidable. It was very real. And I wasn't prepared for how much the truth was going to hurt me. I thought the confirmation would give me back my sanity. Instead, it shattered the future I thought I had. That's something I think people don't always understand about betrayal. You don't only discover that someone lied, you discover that you were making real decisions inside a reality that was not real. You replay the moves, the sacrifices, the conversations, thinking about the times that you apologized, the moments you ignored your own instincts because you wanted to trust the person that you loved. And then you began wondering, how much of my life was true? So his confession, it didn't only change my present. Essentially, it rewrote my past. So before I tell you what happened next, I want to explain what I mean when I used the term earlier, the term malignant narcissism. The word narcissist, it gets used so casually now that I felt like I needed to explain it. So someone who posts too many selfies, we call them narcissists. They may not be. Someone who behaves selfishly, and we call them a narcissist. Someone hurts us, cheats, or refuses to apologize, and we immediately diagnose them. But not every selfish person has a narcissistic personality disorder. Not every person who cheats is a malignant narcissist. And one terrible act does not automatically equal a personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder, it is a recognized mental health diagnosis involving a persistent pattern that can include grandiosity, entitlement, exploitation, a need for admiration, fragile self-esteem, and impaired empathy. It's a clinical concept that's used to describe a more destructive pattern in which narcissistic traits, it can be combined with aggression, paranoia, antisocial behavior, vindictiveness, or willingness to hurt or dominate other people. So this is not something we should casually diagnose from across the internet or on Facebook or something like that. But I'm sharing the language that eventually helped me understand when I started going to therapy, the persistent patterns that I experienced. And one of those patterns was his response to being exposed. Because when I confronted him, his first response was not concern for the betrayal he had done to me. It was outrage that I discovered it. The evidence threatened the reality that he had constructed. Immediately, instead of taking responsibility, he attacked the person holding the evidence. He attacked me. That distinction matters. Remorse focuses on the person who was harmed. Fear of exposure on what will happen to the person who was caught. Remorse says, I can't believe I did this to you. Fear of exposure says, I can't believe you found out. So both of those reactions might include some tears, but they're not necessarily coming from the same place. So then there was this big performance. My husband, he did confess. He finally said the words, I'm cheating on you with Natalie. And for a moment, I thought the performance was over. It wasn't. Within minutes, this man, he started clutching his chest. His eyes widened for a second. He started gasping for air. And he stumbled towards our couch and announced, I think I'm having a heart attack. So the man who had just confessed to having an affair was suddenly the person in crisis, and I was expected to rescue him. He told me I needed to take him to the hospital. But when I didn't immediately rush to his side, he looked at me and said, you don't care. You don't care if I live or die. Let that simmer a little bit. Minutes earlier, I just discovered this man was having an affair. I had learned another woman's number was saved under the name John Adams. My marriage had just shattered in front of me. But now the question was whether or not I cared enough about him. His betrayal had become his emergency. His deception had become his pain. And I was once again being handed a role. The role of being the caretaker, the rescuer, the apologetic wife, the woman who was supposed to abandon her own pain the moment he appeared to be hurting. But this time, I didn't accept that role. I looked at him and I said, if you're truly having a heart attack, you need to dial 911 or drive yourself to the hospital. I do want to be clear about something, though. Chest pain should always be taken seriously. If you believe someone may be experiencing a medical emergency, always call emergency services. But in that moment, I recognized the pattern that I was witnessing. The moment accountability entered the room, a crisis appeared that required me to stop confronting him and start caring for him. That's how manipulation works sometimes. The distraction doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like helplessness. Sometimes it looks like tears. Sometimes it looks like an emergency, but the result is the same. Your attention moves away from what they did and it returns to what they need. For years, that strategy worked on me. His pain became more urgent than mine. His emotions became my responsibility. His comfort became the price of peace. But that day, something inside me had gone quiet. Like I said, I didn't have that Angela Bassett moment. I didn't panic. I didn't rush to him either. I didn't apologize. I didn't perform the part that he expected me to play. I just sat there and I watched him, and He waited too for the old version of me to show up, and I never did. The woman who would forget her own heartbreak to save him from the consequences of his choices, she didn't come. And for the first time, the performance had no audience. Now, that moment does not mean I was healed. Let's be clear. It didn't mean I immediately packed my bags and left. It didn't mean I stopped loving him. It meant that for that one moment, I could see the manipulation while it was happening. And once you recognize the script, it becomes harder to keep playing the role. And that was the beginning of my awakening. Not my escape, not my healing, but I was awake. Awakening is when you begin seeing the pattern. Healing is when you begin choosing yourself differently because of what you see. And leaving, when leaving is the right and safe decision, is often a process rather than just a single moment. And I had not reached that point yet. I hadn't reached the end. In many ways, some of the most devastating parts of the story were still ahead of me. But that day, I heard something I hadn't heard clearly in years. I heard my own voice. And it said, "You are not imagining this. You are not responsible for rescuing him from the consequences of hurting you. You are not required to abandon yourself simply because the person who harmed you is suddenly uncomfortable." Maybe you've experienced something similar. You tried to address another person's behavior, but before that conversation ended, you were comforting them. You expressed pain and they became the victim. You set a boundary and then suddenly you were cruel. You asked them for honesty and then somehow you were accused of creating conflict. You entered the conversation prepared to talk about what happened, and then you left apologizing for how you reacted to it. If that sounds familiar, I want you to ask yourself, what role am I always expected to play? Is it the fixer? The peacemaker? Is it the rescuer? The one who accepts the blame? The person who forgives before there's been accountability? You don't have to share the details. I just want you to think about that because for me, I was expected to do it all. Not everyone is, but that's the hard part, switching up the role. And seeing the pattern, though, doesn't mean that you're responsible for changing the other person. It just means you can begin deciding whether you're willing to keep participating in it. And I wish that I could tell you that his confession ended the betrayal. It didn't. He confessed, he cried, he briefly apologized, and then he continued living as though our marriage had not just shattered, like nothing was wrong. I carried the devastation. He carried on. And that was probably one of the most painful parts for me, that I was left questioning everything I thought I knew about my marriage, while he seemed to believe that just saying the words out loud would bring the conversation to an end. But a confession is not accountability in my book. Accountability requires honesty beyond the moment of exposure. It requires empathy for the person who was harmed. It requires a willingness to answer difficult questions without attacking the person asking them. Accountability requires changed behavior, and none of that changed. Instead, the pattern continued. The denial became minimization. The tears became excuses. The apology became irritation that I was still hurt. And before long, I was expected to forgive something that he hadn't taken any sort of meaningful responsibility for repairing. The truth also forced me to revisit every moment I had dismissed, because there were a lot. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the times that he would circle the block before pulling into the driveway, the hidden phone calls, suspicious explanations, the time he's tried to leave our house to go help a friend put together their baby's crib while our baby's crib was still upstairs sitting in a box. All those moments that once made me question myself suddenly made so much sense. My instincts had not betrayed me. I had been trained not to trust them. And discovering that affair did not immediately set me free. It just pulled me into another cycle, a cycle of confession, denial, apology, blame, promises, and more disappointment. Because the hardest truth was not simply that my husband had cheated, it was that even after I knew the truth, I still wasn't ready to leave. That's the part people struggle to understand. Once the truth is undeniable, they assume leaving will be easy. But discovering the truth and being emotionally ready to act on it are two very different things. By then, I wasn't only holding on to the man he had shown himself to be, I was holding on to our memories, the promises, the life that we were building, and the hope that the person I loved would finally choose to change. The real question was never simply, why didn't you leave? It was, what had this relationship taught you to believe about yourself, about love, and about what you're supposed to endure? And because I finally stopped believing his lies, but I had not yet stopped believing in his potential. And those, again, those are two very different things. So that's where we're going next. We're going to talk about the trauma bond, why moments of pain followed by affection can create such a powerful emotional attachment, why an apology can feel like hope even when nothing changes, why knowing the truth does not automatically break the bond, and why leaving an emotionally abusive relationship is rarely as simple as walking through the door. Because sometimes the same person who causes the pain also becomes the person you look to for relief from it. And that cycle can be incredibly difficult to recognize, much less escape it. Until then, remember, a confession without changed behavior is not accountability. Someone else's refusal to take responsibility does not make their behavior your fault. You do not have to abandon your pain to manage the emotions of the person who caused it. And seeing the pattern even before you're ready to leave it is still a form of awakening. I want you to keep healing, keep becoming, and remember, you were never erased. Until next week, good night, my friends.
Yeah, I came back different. They counted me out, now count it up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I learned how to smile with tears in my eyes, built a whole world around beautiful lies.